All right, everybody, welcome to session one, episode one of my new little show called Fill the Glass. This session is being recorded. If all goes well, it'll show up on YouTube sometime later today. I am your host, Cary Millsap, and today's subject is Ask Me Anything. I probably know most of you personally who are here, and thank you very much for joining the live version of this. This is a graph of my background. It spans way back into the 1980s, where I was a software developer at United Technologies, and spans a 10-year career at Oracle. Several years since 2000, being an entrepreneur and trying to make a living in this Oracle world. Anyway, welcome aboard. Thank you very much for joining. This show is all about connecting. And one of the vehicles that we've created to do that better is our Slack workspace. So before I kick off with questions and answers, I want to talk very briefly about Slack and the basics of what you need to know in order to communicate with us through Slack. It's been a really good experience. I've done a couple of programs before where the Slack channel was our primary means of communicating with our audience, and it's performed really well. But in order to use Slack, you have to have access to the method R workspace in Slack. So you can access the method R workspace by invitation. And the way you get an invitation is simply write any of the emails that you've gotten from me. You can simply just hit reply and say, hey, please add me to your Slack channel. It's optional, but I think it's going to be as good for you as it's been for the rest of us. And several people who are already on here already have access to our Slack channel, and you know what I'm talking about. On our Slack channel, we have three main channels that we access. The technical channel is the one where most of the interesting things that we talk about, solving each other's problems and working together on technical mysteries and things, they'll all go in that technical category. The general category is a place where announcements about events and kind of administrative stuff about the workspace will go. And then random is, if you want to talk about something totally off topic, but this is an interesting audience to trot things by, then hit the random channel. We currently are using the Slack free program, or I shouldn't say program, but basically the free option that Slack offers. And the penalty for doing that is we only get 90 days of retention on our data. So I think that'll be fine for Fill the Glass, because I think as we go, there'll be a lot of valuable things. If there end up being a lot of people and a lot of content that we want to dip back more than 90 days to access, then I'll consider increasing our investment in our Slack plan. So that's the main things about getting into Slack. The two mistakes that I tended to make over and over when I first started in Slack, and I see this when people haven't used Slack before. So forgive me if you use Slack all the time and this is redundant. I'll only take about 30 seconds to describe it. But there are really two concepts in Slack that you need to have your mind on every day. One is new messages that you post. And basically, if you click down here, you're going to be starting a new thread. If you really just want to respond to a thread, then hover over the thread you want to respond to, and this little toolbar will pop up. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th in the roster is this reply and thread button. So it's kind of not obvious. In fact, let me actually show you what Slack looks like right now on my workstation. So, and let's see if I can find one here. I think there's a message in random. So when Tanel said, "Greetings, Earthlings," if I want to respond to him, I would click here. But if I wanted to start a new thread, I would click here, and most people click the start a new thread by accident. So just realize when you hover a message, you can continue in a thread by clicking over there. When I do that, by the way, the screen's going to split in two, and now I can have a whole conversation here while the world's heartbeat kind of continues independently of me over here. So that's number one. Number two, the big mistake I used to make is I believe the default behavior in Slack is when you press enter. So if I'm over here typing in a message and a reply and I hit the enter key to go to a new paragraph, well, I believe the default setting is to fire the message and send it. In other words, it's the same thing as hitting this little paper airplane button down here. What I like to do is go to Slack's preferences, which on a Mac is Command comma. On a Windows machine you can go to Slack settings. But what I like to do is go to the advanced settings and choose when typing code with backticks, enter should not send the message. I like that option. And I also like that when writing a message, press enter to start a new line as opposed to send. So that's not necessarily the fact that you're going to want that option, but I like it because I mostly, when I hit enter, I intend for it to be a new line, not for it to be a send, but it's an option. It's your choice. Okay. That is my carryings on about the administrative stuff. And I'd like to move into the ask me anything part. I'd really like to talk about what you guys would like to talk about. Now I've put 4 book covers here on the slide just to use as fodder. I'll quickly kind of introduce you guys to these things because I think you've seen probably 2 or 3 of them. The first book here is the first Oracle book that Jeff Holt and I wrote back for O'Reilly back in 2003. I think it was published in 2003 or 2004. That kind of gave us a good little kickstart in the market. This Mastering Oracle Trace Data book is in its 3rd edition. And I believe I wrote the first edition something like 2011, and it's been updated recently. It was updated around Christmas, just typos and things like that. But anyway, this is a thick 350 plus page book that's got lots of stuff about trace data, lots of stuff about case studies and things like that, and lots of stuff about using our product. And I debated whether to make the book about our product or not, but it's kind of hard not to, because when you attack a big trace file, you need tools. And so I just went ahead and embraced the fact that, well, if you need tools, let's talk about the tools. This book here in slot number 3 called Faster, I actually self-published back in December 2021. So early 2022. It's been out for about a year. And it's not about Oracle. It's got a lot of stories about Oracle, but it doesn't really mention Oracle specifically very often. But this is kind of an autobiographical, everything I've done in my whole career having to do with trying to optimize systems sort of a book. I got a copy on my desk. It's here, and it's this big. It's like the size of a normal business book. I say that because the next book's a little bitty rascal. If I can get it on frame here. It's called Tracing Oracle. It's not ready yet, but it's at least printable. I can at least see a proof of it. And one of the things you might want to talk about if you're interested is that there's an associated GitHub URL that if you hit it now, it's live already. The book's not out yet, but the GitHub repository is. And there's some stuff out there that if you want to talk about, that would be good fodder as well. So I don't think that I've muted anybody in the audience. So feel free to unmute. You can also hit the chat. I'm sitting here kind of realizing that logistically I'm not looking at the chat right now. So let me actually do that. I see 7 things in the chat. Here we go. Let's see. No, so Steve Tennell did not say he was an Earthling. He was greeting the Earthlings. He did not necessarily claim to be one in that. Let's see. Somebody said looks a bit like Teams and Microsoft. Can I make the presentation window larger? I can do that. Steve, is that helpful? Okay, I got a thumbs up from Steve on that. Yes, see, I enjoy Slack 100 times more than Teams. Me too. It's better organized. I agree. And has better keyboard shortcuts. I agree also with that. Yeah, Sean, thank you, sir. And let's see, Yak, let's see here. Let's say I've been with Oracle for nearly a decade now, working on big data and cloud space. Are there any plans to publish performance optimization for the cloud space, specifically hyperscalers? I don't know if that's going to be me. The things that I'm going to talk about are really the things that happen to me in life. And if a project comes to me where I've got to do some OCI, ADB, blah, blah, blah thing, then I'll do it and I'll talk about it and I'll write about it. And in fact, I really didn't have any OCI experience at all until probably a couple of months ago. And in the preparation of this guy, trying to come up with like, how do you get your data file if you're using AWS, right? If you're tracing and you create a file in the file system on AWS, how do you access it? And as it turns out, the instructions at AWS are a little bit deficient because if you have more than 4,000 bytes in your SQL, for example, it gets truncated. And so my colleague Jeff Holtz wrote a blog post at methodr.com that talks about, well, how do you work around that? And that code is referred in this book, and it's sitting in that GitHub repository. And actually, since I've mentioned it a couple of times, let me go ahead and stick this up here and I'll show you what's going on. I think, Stephen, you might like it if I do that. At least some of that. So this is a disk consumption rate calculator that I wrote. We can talk about that if you want to, but in the code folder, I've got a scripts folder and a SQL folder. The scripts folder has gettracefile.java. It's got a gettracefile setup.sql that you run before you run this. And there's also a Perl implementation of the same thing. So if you want to, let's see if I can show you this. So at the bottom of every method R page, there's this recent posts thing. And I think Jeff's post is, yeah, it's right here. It's called Fetching Oracle Trace Data from, say, Amazon RDS. And so this is an article which describes everything that's going on in this gettracefile.java file here. So I know it's a long answer, but yeah, if cloud stuff comes our way, then cloud stuff's what we're going to be working on. And I'm sorry, but I'm old enough now. I can say I'm too old to not have my way with getting trace data. So I'm going to be really eager to hope that ADB, and I've got some insider information that autonomous Oracle databases are going to have more tracing features here real soon. So fingers crossed. I can't give you dates or anything, but I'm pretty confident from some conversations I've had that it's actually going to happen. So let's see here. Are you involved with the 23C beta? Are you and Jeff taking a look at it yet? And the answer, Rich, is as of yesterday, I can say yes. I spent a couple days last week trying to get my 23C beta instance created on OCI. I did so. Friday, I was able to connect. Yesterday, I was able to actually go have a look at a couple things. I've sent the email to the appropriate executive vice presidents within Oracle requesting permission to talk about those things. I have not received permission to do so yet, so I can't really talk about what's in there. It doesn't look like they've taken anything out. So all the things that you're accustomed to doing in 18C, 19C, and 21C are still there. There may be a couple of extra things that come, but again, I'm not permitted to talk about them yet. But bottom line, Rich, yes, I'm involved in the 23C beta. Chester says Mr. Norris expresses his birthday wishes to Mr. Millsap as well. Thank you, Mr. Justice. Please tell Mr. Norris that I appreciate his birthday wishes. Sean Scott says, if this isn't off topic for the Ask Me Anything, I'd like to hear your thoughts on self-publishing versus working through a publisher, likes, dislikes, pros and cons. I would love to talk about that. And one of the things about this show is I would love to talk about things like that are bigger than Oracle, bigger than just the technical details of one specific set of products. So let me hold up some stuff here. I showed you a picture of these books. Let's see, where's the camera? There we go. So this is how big they are, and this is kind of my amassment of my collected knowledge over the years that I've bothered to write down. The first one was published with O'Reilly. Actually, I'd written a book. Yeah, I'm not going to show you a picture of it, but actually as a junior in college, I wrote a book called Basic for the IBM PC. So I had publishing experience before with John Wiley and Sons. So I knew what it was like working with an editor. And working with Jonathan Genick at O'Reilly was an amazing experience. This book right here is phenomenally better than it would have been had it not been for Jonathan Genick. So in that case, having not total control was actually a really good thing for the audience, because this is a better book for Jonathan's participation. So O'Reilly 2003, amazing. Learned a lot. Next book, I decided, I talked to Jonathan about this, and he said, if it weren't for all the stuff about your Method R software, it looks like an interesting book. And he thumbed to about right here and said, would you like to publish just this much of it? This much. Because that's the stuff that's generic to Oracle. But he said, I'm afraid if we try to publish a book about your product, then nobody would buy it. Because I mean, how many people buy Oracle compared to how many people buy your Method R products? And I understood that, but I felt like I needed a book that actually did show how to use our products. A lot like you can go buy a book about Photoshop, right? And the first half of the book can be about digital photography and the benefits of doing it digitally instead of real film, and all kinds of stuff about digital photography in general without talking about Photoshop. But there comes a time when you're like, okay, now I actually want to do some stuff. And if all I know about digital photography is theory and industry generics, well, I can't really do anything. So anyway, that's why there end up being books about Photoshop, is because Photoshop sells millions of copies, and it's a big enough market that book publishers can actually afford to sell a book that's focused on Photoshop. With this one, not so much. So I was kind of confined by that to self-publishing. So I don't want to take the remainder of the time, but there's a list of about 10 things that you have to do if you self-publish that you don't have to do if you use a publisher. And of course, find an editor, find a copy editor, know the difference between the two, find a production editor, and you've got to take on those roles if you don't find them yourself. You've got to do the typesetting yourself. You've got to do the layout yourself. You've got to figure out a way to do the cover yourself. You've got to figure out how to do the table of contents and the index yourself. There's layouts for those as well. And those are all things that I happen to enjoy. I mean, back in graduate school, I got hooked on this Donald Knuth product called Tech, T-E, Chi, or it looks like T-E-X. And it was a photo typesetting system that Donald Knuth took about 10 years out of his career of writing computer science books to create so that he could have more control. Most people who are probably technical content people might not enjoy typography and layout and doing their own art and doing their own index and all those things themselves. But it's a great question. Thank you. I love talking about it, but I don't want to monopolize the whole session talking about it. Hit me in Slack if you want more details. That's the kind of thing that we built the Slack workspace to talk about. Let's see, I've been following Connor for the past few days. Hans says on YouTube he's also posting new 23C stuff, trace related. No, I haven't seen it yet. Thank you. I'd love to go make sure I have a look at that, because he's going to have blessing to talk about things before I will. So I appreciate that, Hans. I'll make sure I do that. Magnus, thank you very much, sir. Rich, thank you very much for the birthday wishes. Let's see. Also, yeah, they're just coming from San Antonio, from Belgium. Thank you very much. Eric, you're welcome, sir. Thank you for the happy birthday. And I appreciate, he says, thank you for having this AMA. I gotta tell you, I mean, I worry about pretty much anything. You can do anything in the world, and if it relates to me at all, I'm gonna worry about it. And the main thing I was worried about today is the me focus of this show. To be honest, I just wanted something to break the ice, to establish a pattern. I intend to do this every single week. I want to talk about writing and thinking and testing and Oracle tracing and what's going on in the Postgres world. And I'm going to have guests that are going to be a lot more fun to listen to than just a soliloquy from Cary Millsap every week. So, Eric, when you say thank you for having this AMA, I really appreciate it, because the thing I was most worried about is like, well, I kind of hate having a show that's just all about Cary. So I worried about that. But seeing this makes me feel a little better. I'll still worry, but I feel much better. Steve says, remember back in the day when books had a CD-ROM in the back with the software on it? Mind you, would increase the book price somewhat significantly. Yes, sir. I didn't mention it, but I plan on charging a couple $1,000s for this little 63-page thing. I'll only have to sell one if I do that. So that's my new marketing strategy. Either that or it'll be 5 or 10, and I'll try to sell 1 million. I'm still trying to think my way through that. I'll worry about that. Chat wants to know about fonts and 2 spaces after a period and so forth. Yes, hit the Slack channel with me. I have a blog post. It's 4 pages long, Chat. I'm passionate about that subject, and it's a little different than what you might expect. Let's see. Yeah, cool to get all the software. I just had Stephen Feuerstein's book on my desk because I didn't know enough PL SQL to get something simple done the other day. And I noticed it's got the little 3.5-inch floppy and like taped to the back cover. That's how long I've had that. So don't even have a DVD player. Man, it's a floppy in the Stephen book that I have. And then let's see. Chat's mostly outside Oracle now, Databricks, Snowflake, Redshift. The answer to 93.79% of all performance problems is add more nodes or use a bigger cluster. I guess. Problem solved until it isn't. Yeah, that's where I expected you to land on that. Let's see. I've got 3 minutes left, and I promise you we're going to end on time. If we don't end on time, we're going to end early. I'll tell you a quick story. I don't know if you guys know who Edward Tufte is, Tufte, but you should if you don't. And I bet most of you do because you probably heard me tell the story before. But Edward Tufte is who I would regard as one of the world's best teachers about communication, and specifically communication with graphical, visual means of communicating from one person to another. And I went down and took a course of his in Austin. I drove down to sit in a room with roughly 1,000 other people. He had 1,000 people in his class, and watched him perform for a day. And he told us, he said, presenting is really not that difficult to teach how to do it. He said, basically, it's just two little pieces of advice I'll give you about becoming an amazing presenter. He said, number one, be awesome. He just kind of froze and looked at us for a couple of seconds, and we're like, okay, that's all right. Be awesome. And he says, and number two, if you can't be awesome, at least finish early. And I thought that's awesome advice from one of the best presenters in the world. So we're going to do that. It's 10:54. Thank you so much for loading up. I'm going to send you another email probably today about next week's show. We're going to load it back up at 10:30 next week, 10:30 Central Time, chat, next week, and we're going to do another one of these, and hopefully they'll just get ever more interesting from one episode to the next. So thank you all for joining. I really appreciate it. I'll see you next time.